I'll be reading to you from the Gospel of Mark, the 9th verse through the 13th verse of the first chapter. In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the river Jordan. And just as he was coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens torn apart and the Spirit descended like a dove on him. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased." And the Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness. He was in the wilderness 40 days, tested by Satan, and he was with the wild beasts, and the angels waited on him. I don't know if the wilderness included pneumonia, but I kind of feel like it did. This week I got pneumonia, so I feel like I've been in the wilderness, but I want you to think back. Do you remember the first time you were sent out in ministry? Maybe as a doctor or a teacher or an engineer or an accountant or as a manager. And what was your first 2 years like? I remember coming out of college with a strong sense of wanting to be a music educator. I imagined kids eager to learn, choirs leaning into my every word, bands marching in time, blasting out an amazing rendition of the theme to Eye of the Tiger. I mean, I couldn't wait to get into it, you know. I was dreaming of a room full of eager students ready to soak up my every word. Obviously, I'd never been to a junior high choir class before. And I remember the first time I met my band, it was the middle of summer, and I had just been hired. And it was the town's 100-year anniversary. And they wanted the band to march in the parade, the Centennial Parade. So I got this band together. I had never seen them. I've never heard them before. And I asked them what piece they thought they would love the most and they did the best at, you know. So I wanted to put the best out there. And so we pulled out this piece and we ran through it. And I am not kidding you, I couldn't hear a melody. I couldn't make sense of what we sounded like. It just sounded like pure chaos. And that was the only rehearsal we had. I wonder if that's not a little bit like Jesus must have felt like. He had just been baptized. He knew where he wanted to go. He felt God's hand on his shoulder and in his heart. And this was to be his vocation. And the first thing God does is throw him out into the wilderness. For me, that being a band director in Wakanda, South Dakota, for me that was one experience of that, but I also had that the first year I was a pastor full-time. I wanted to preach love, love, love. That's all I heard in seminary. Love, love, love. You know, just preach it, bro. And a woman came up to me after my third sermon and she said, "You know what? You preach a lot about love, but if you really read the Bible, do you know that there's one word more prevalent than love? Hell. Pastor Brooke, you need to preach more hell in your sermons." Man, talk about wilderness. I had no hell to give. Why does the Spirit of God, the wind of God, blow us into these challenging moments, right? What good are these 40 days and nights set so far away from where we want to be? What is God trying to do with us here in the wilderness? What is it about belovedness that leads us right out into wilderness? Shouldn't belovedness lead us into safe places? Shouldn't belovedness lead us to applause? Shouldn't belovedness lead us to a place of comfortable ministry where we can just launch strategies and they just go? But instead, the Spirit leads us, at least Scripture tells us, into a stiff north wind, wilderness. Many of you, if you follow American football, know who Michael Irvin is. He's a Hall of Fame receiver for the Dallas Cowboys. Darren, you know who this guy is. He was part of the Cowboys team that did an impossible three-peat in winning the Super Bowl 3 times. And Michael Irvin was the star receiver. Cindy and I were living in Dallas during that time. I was going to seminary at SMU campus, and we immediately fell in love with this guy, Michael Irvin. He came from a large family like we did. You know, he had, I think, 10 or 11, 12 kids in his family. And he had this immense energy and the spirit. It was just infectious. You could not be happy by being around this guy. He was just a superstar. But he also had demons. He struggled with drug abuse throughout his time as a football player. He wasn't a great father. He failed miserably. And he liked to party a lot, you know. And so when he found out he was going to be elected to the Hall of Fame, he decided he needed some time in the wilderness. He spent 40 days and nights out in the wilderness. Michael called this place the threshing floor, a place where he and God were going to meet, and Michael would allow God's mighty wind to pound into his big old ego and put him back righteous and whole, centered again, humbled for sure, but also headed in the right direction for the second half of his life. It was a bold move for Michael. He could have coasted into the Hall of Fame on Easy Street. Instead, he chose to let God bring him to his knees, to humble him, and in the process, heal him, set him in right relationship with God and his neighbors again. And if you ever want to listen to probably the greatest speech in the Hall of Fame, it's that speech. It's considered by many one of the best of the Hall of Fame speeches ever given. Michael comes clean to his sons in public. He admits his failures as a father and vows to live a new way into their lives. He asks for forgiveness. He comes clean. That is the power that wilderness can have for us. God's threshing floor, if we dare to do it. That's kind of what worship ought to be sometimes. A threshing floor for us. A place where we kind of sift through what really matters. A place where we throw our lives up to the wind and see what remains and see what is still true. In Scripture, this is what holy ground really is. It's open air. It's the north wind. It's where grain is tossed up and the chaff blows away. It's a place of separation, a place where truth comes to our heart. Interestingly, Scripture gives us 2 threshing floors that matter, I think. 2 of them. One belongs to a king, and the other belongs to a widow. The first one is the king's threshing floor. It's 2 Samuel chapter 24. King David makes a classic leadership mistake. He starts counting troops, which is biblical language for, I want to double check just how impressive I am. We've done a version of this, I'm guessing, counted something to reassure ourselves, maybe look back at our savings account and look at how big it is, or look at how many followers we have on our YouTube or on our Instagram. We look at our church attendance if we're pastors. We look at our golf scores, only the ones we like, but just very selectively. It is not a good thing to do. It's always going to go badly. And it goes badly for David. A plague spreads across the land. And where does the angel finally stop for David? On a threshing floor. On a threshing floor. And David buys that floor and says, I will not offer to the Lord my God something that costs me nothing. In other words, he's saying, I'm going to come clean. I'm going to get on that threshing floor and let God's wind blow. There's no shortcuts. There's no ego, no pretending. That threshing floor becomes the place where David stops harming others and where power kneels to love. Where a king remembers that he is not God. Some of us maybe know that floor. It's a place where you whisper, Lord, whatever you do, don't let me mess this up anymore. Richard Rohr often prays for a humble moment every day of his life. He said, I want one moment in my life that humbles him. And he says when he was growing up, he was in a monastery, just like 17 years old, and he thought he was the hot shot. He was smart. He had all the words. He had all the theology. But the head monk of the monastery was athletic, and he wanted all the monks to go outside and play baseball. And so Richard Rohr knew nothing about athletics. He knew nothing about baseball, but he thought, okay, come on, how hard can it be? A bunch of jocks know how to play baseball. I can do this thing. And so he gets out there and he's playing baseball, and the whole town is out there watching the monks play. And sure enough, he gets up to bat first, doesn't even know what he's doing, but he gets up there and he walks to first. So, hey, gets on base, gets on first, doing good. And then the next guy hits a fly ball, and Richard Rohr says, oh, fly ball. I guess I'll step off first base and catch it. And he caught it. And everybody just laughed their heads off at him. And he got his humble moment, right? And he needed it at that time. That was a threshing floor moment. That was David's moment as well. But there's another threshing floor in Scripture. And that's the widow's threshing floor. In Ruth, remember Ruth? The 3rd chapter, a widow named Ruth goes at night to the threshing floor of Boaz. She has absolutely no power, no leverage. She has nothing. She has no safety net, no guarantee. And let's just say this is not a Hallmark Channel moment. It is a risky moment for Ruth. She is vulnerable. She's in a complicated situation. And essentially, she throws herself at Boaz's feet and says, I am here, and I am going to trust you. And instead of shame, Boaz gives her kindness. Instead of rejection, she finds covenant. That threshing floor becomes the birthplace of hope. The line of David, and eventually Jesus, doesn't begin in a palace. It begins on that windy farm floor in the dark, with her having the guts to kneel before Boaz, and Boaz having the compassion to give her hope. God does some of God's best work in places that would never pass a church building committee. And here's what struck me this week as I went through pneumonia. The wilderness and the threshing floor aren't that different. They're both open air. They both are exposed, both windy places, and both are places where something gets sifted. Right after Jesus hears, "You are my beloved," the Spirit drives him into the wilderness, not to destroy him, not to revoke the blessing, but to sift what belovedness really means. The wilderness is a kind of a threshing floor. No tempo, no crowd, no applause, just hunger and temptation. And the whisper of empire, the temptation of empire. Turn stones to bread. Take control. Prove yourself. Who are you without power? Who are you without spectacle? Who are you if no one's watching you, Jesus? The wilderness isn't where God is trying to destroy Jesus. It's where God refuses to let empire be the loudest thing in the wind. And we would do good to listen deeply to that same wind, not for empire, but for gospel, not for condemnation, but for mercy. Because the wind of God is not trying to shame us, it is trying to separate the false self from the beloved self. Jesus stands in that wind, and for 40 days he lets the wind blow. And what remains? He's not going to be a show. He's not going to dominate. He's not going to let his ego win. Instead, trust, love, belovedness remains. And if that is true for him, I think it could be true for us. Maybe some of you are in a wilderness season right now. Maybe something is being sifted in our congregation. Maybe pride is sitting too tall. Maybe fear is running way too deep. Maybe certainty is crumbling at your feet. Maybe the illusion that you are in control is being shifted. The threshing floor isn't where God is trying to destroy you. It's where God refuses to let your ego be the loudest thing in the wind. And that, my friend, if we can listen, can be the most holy place we know. And all the people said,